In the year 1917, amidst the turmoil in Germany, a tale unfolded during a time of war. Amidst the chaos, German soldiers filled the scene, their cries echoing in the air. The battlefield was littered with lifeless bodies, and fear gripped everyone. In the midst of this grim tableau, we encounter a young, frightened soldier. He sat in disbelief, surrounded by the haunting presence of the fallen. A fellow soldier approached him, compelling him to rise and join the fight. With newfound resolve, the young soldier stepped onto the battlefield alongside his comrades. It was there that he experienced the intense moment of taking the life of a French soldier for the first time. As time passed, the grim toll of the war became evident. Many soldiers, including the once fearful young man, met their end on the battlefield, their bodies slowly succumbing to decay. To preserve their dignity, all the fallen soldiers were placed in coffins. One by one, their uniforms were removed, cleaned, and readied for the next generation of soldiers. Meanwhile, life in the city continued. A young boy named Paul had a strong desire to become a brave soldier and fight in the war. He finally made his way to the place where the army was selecting soldiers for service. He filled out the required forms, but there was a problem. His father wouldn't have allowed him to join the army. So, Paul cleverly copied his father's signature on the form and enlisted, along with some of his friends. All the chosen soldiers gathered at a central location, where a general addressed them, emphasizing the great honor of being a soldier. This message filled the young recruits with even more excitement and pride. They were then issued uniforms that had once belonged to fallen soldiers, and Paul and his friends felt a deep sense of pride wearing them. They had no idea what lay ahead as soldiers but believed this day would change their lives for the better. The soldiers were informed that they were being sent to the Western Front in northern France. They set out on their journey but were told to disembark from the trucks halfway and continue on foot. As they began walking, bombs hidden by the French soldiers started exploding, forcing everyone to lie down immediately. They were warned to put on their gas masks quickly, as a dangerous gas attack could happen at any moment. Panicked, everyone hurriedly put on their masks. Paul noticed his friend struggling, so he tried to help him. However, in his rush to assist, Paul was scolded by his senior. They were reminded to prioritize their own safety before assisting others. Upon reaching their destination, they found the base in a terrible condition. It was flooded. They were instructed to remove the water, but they didn't have buckets or any other tools. In a creative solution, everyone took off their helmets and used them to scoop out the water. In the midst of their challenging circumstances, Paul met a man who explained the dire situation they were facing. Meanwhile, one of Paul's friends, deeply disturbed by the harsh reality of war, expressed his desire to return home. He was shocked by what he had witnessed, realizing the gravity of their situation. However, the truth was they couldn't simply leave. They were now bound to fight the war, unable to escape its clutches. Night fell, and their tasks continued. They were assigned to stand guard at the border. Unaware of the imminent danger, Paul and his companion stood watch. It was in this darkness that a bullet struck Paul's helmet, narrowly missing his head. He realized the gravity of the situation. His helmet had saved his life. Moments later, bombs began to rain down, throwing everything into chaos. The soldiers sought refuge in the basement, where bullets whizzed by in the midst of the tumult. Paul's frightened friend, previously filled with regret, now panicked, crying out that he needed to go back home. But his pleas fell on deaf ears. In the midst of chaos, one of Paul's companions stepped out and was tragically hit by a bomb, shattering his body. The sight was horrifying, leaving everyone even more terrified. Bombs continued to explode, intensifying the fear. The constant blasts made them believe the basement would collapse, urging them to evacuate as quickly as possible. Everyone rushed out, except for Paul. Moments later, the basement did collapse, and those outside assumed Paul hadn't survived. When soldiers arrived the next morning and cleared the debris, they were astonished to find Paul alive. They helped him sit down, and the man who had initially informed him about the place appeared once more. Recognizing Paul's hunger, he offered him a piece of bread to eat. Shortly after, another soldier approached Paul. He told him that he couldn't remain idle. His task was to collect the badges of the fallen soldiers, each bearing their names, so that their families could be informed of their fate. As Paul continued the grim task of collecting soldiers' badges, he came across his friend's spectacles. It was a painful reminder of the comrade who had been scared and, moving a little further, he found his friend's lifeless body. Overwhelmed with grief, Paul couldn't afford to cry for long, so he pressed on with his solemn duty. Time passed in this sorrowful manner. An officer recorded the names of the fallen soldiers in a register from their badges and reported the situation to his senior officer, Matthias. The officer expressed his concern, sharing that more than 40,000 soldiers had lost their lives, and he believed it was time to halt the war, fearing the consequences of continued conflict. Matthias, pondering how to end the war, summoned his senior officers for a meeting. Meanwhile, Paul and his team were transferred from one place to another, ending up at a new base alongside other soldiers. They discovered a nearby farm, and Paul and his companions couldn't resist stealing and savoring some ducks, enjoying a delicious meal. It was a rare taste of good food after a long time, and later, they sat together, peeling potatoes for their dinner. After that, near their base, Paul and his comrades spotted a group of beautiful French girls. One of Paul's teammates, trying to impress them, performed a strange dance and managed to capture their attention. He went off with the girls, leaving the others behind. Later, letters from home arrived and were distributed among the soldiers. A teammate who couldn't read or write approached Paul and asked him to read his letter. From it, Paul learned that the man had a wife and a child, but the child had passed away due to an illness. During the night, the teammate who had gone with the girls returned, sharing the whole story and displaying a handkerchief he had taken from them as a memento. The next morning, news arrived that 60 more soldiers were expected to join them, but they hadn't reached the base. Worried, Paul led a group of soldiers to find them. They traced their route to the train station, only to encounter a spreading gas cloud. Investigating further, they discovered that all 60 soldiers had tragically perished because they had removed their gas masks prematurely. In the wake of the tragic loss of the 60 soldiers, fear permeated the ranks. Meanwhile, in Germany, a soldier approached a senior officer, informing him of the soldiers' deaths and pleading to end the war. However, the head remained resolute, refusing to accept defeat. He ordered all remaining soldiers to be sent to the Western Front and even considered gathering more troops if necessary. Meanwhile, Matthias, deeply concerned about the soldiers under his command, desperately sought a way to halt the impending carnage. He tried to communicate with his government, attempting to find a means to stop the war. On the other side, Paul and his team received orders to move to the Western Front. The head had commanded them to prepare for battle. Matthias managed to gather all the officers and presented a comprehensive report detailing the devastating impact of the war on their country. He urged them to sign the report, hoping it would persuade the authorities to halt the conflict. However, one French officer refused to sign, insisting on waiting for 72 hours before making a decision. Frustration boiled within Matthias as the stubborn French officer refused to acknowledge the urgency of their situation. While they argued, Paul and his fellow soldiers marched towards France, engaged in the grim task of eliminating the French soldiers one by one. Amidst the brutality of war, they stumbled upon a kitchen filled with tempting food. Overwhelmed by hunger, they indulged, but their feast was abruptly interrupted by strange noises. Investigating, they discovered that the French soldiers had brought massive tanks. When they opened fire, the Germans quickly realized their bullets were ineffective against these formidable machines. The tanks advanced, methodically picking off German soldiers. Desperate, the German soldiers planted bombs on the tanks, causing some to explode. However, the French soldiers retaliated with flamethrowers, engulfing the battlefield in flames and claiming more German lives. Amidst the chaos of war, Paul's friend was captured by the French soldiers. Despite pleading for his life and surrendering, he met a horrifying end, burned alive before Paul's eyes. Witnessing this brutality shattered Paul's spirit. Matthias, in possession of a damning report from France, revealed the presence of German officers who were prolonging the war. He implored his fellow officers to consider ending the conflict. One officer voiced concerns about French dominance if they surrendered, but Matthias insisted they had to compromise. In the battlefield, the French Air Force launched a relentless attack on the German soldiers, firing bullets and dropping bombs. Paul was thrown into the water by an explosion, feigning death to avoid further attacks. When he attempted to rise, a vigilant French soldier spotted him, prompting a rain of bombs. Paul managed to overpower the soldier, repeatedly striking him with a knife, but the soldier refused to die. In desperation, Paul stuffed soil into the soldier's mouth, depriving him of air and ending his suffering in a grim and desperate act. In a moment of compassion, Paul tried to save the soldier's life, but it was too late. He discovered a picture of the soldier's wife and son in his pocket. As the soldier passed away, Paul pledged to visit the soldier's home and tell his wife that her husband had been a brave soldier. Returning to his base, Paul found his comrades celebrating a hard-fought victory. He went to visit an injured friend, offering him the same handkerchief he had obtained from the French girls. The injured friend, aware of the severity of his wounds, took a fork and, in an act of desperation, ended his own life. Paul then visited another friend, relieved to see him alive. The friend had brought food for the injured comrade. Amidst the grim reality of war, the friends discussed rumors that the war might be ending soon. Paul was skeptical, uncertain about the likelihood of peace. Meanwhile, Matthias, having gained permission from all the German officers to negotiate the end of the war, faced resistance from France. Despite his efforts, the war appeared destined to continue for at least another 6 hours. In the morning, Paul and his companion headed to the farm once more, hoping to steal something for a good meal. While Paul ventured inside the farm, his companion kept watch outside. Unfortunately, the farmer's son noticed them and fired a shot at Paul's companion, hitting him in the belly. Paul rushed to his wounded comrade, eager to help and remove the bullet, but the injured man declined, asking only for a cigarette and a return to the base for treatment. Paul complied, bringing him back to the base. On their way, they encountered a car filled with jubilant soldiers celebrating the end of the war. Paul asked for their assistance, but none of them offered any help. Upon reaching the base, the doctor delivered grim news: Paul's companion had not survived. Paul couldn't comprehend it. After all, it had been just one bullet in the stomach. The doctor explained that the delay in getting medical attention allowed the bullet to pass through the liver, causing poison to spread throughout his body. Paul was overcome with sadness, as this war had now claimed all his companions. His last friend had met the same tragic fate, leaving him utterly alone in the harsh reality of battle. Following the tragic loss of his companion, an order came for all soldiers to gather. The head, who hadn't given up, insisted they still had time and needed to attack France, despite half the soldiers being reluctant to continue fighting. Despite their weariness, they had to comply with the command. As they reached the base in France, they prepared to strike at 11 o'clock. However, before they could do so, the French soldiers launched a preemptive attack on the Germans. In the chaos, Paul witnessed a French soldier brutally beating an innocent German child who had recently joined the army. He intervened, saving the young soldier, and engaged in a fight with the French soldier in the basement. During the struggle, another French soldier crept up behind Paul, stabbing him. In the midst of this violence, news spread that the war had ended. Injured and weakened, Paul slowly moved forward to witness the aftermath. He managed to step outside but collapsed. An officer approaches the boy whose life Paul had spared and tells him to collect all the badges of the fallen troops. The youngster then reconnects with Paul, who had passed away. The handkerchief his injured colleague had given him was still in his possession. In order to carry the handkerchief with him throughout his life, the youngster removes it from Paul's hand and ties it around his neck. He had prevented his death. This is Paul's tale. He had assumed that joining the military would make his life pleasant, but he had no idea what challenges he would encounter. Many of our courageous warriors risk their lives daily to guard our borders. And with this, the movie comes to an end. Cheers, thanks for watching.